Thank you for the opportunity to make a submission today. The sad reality is that the prostitution industry is harmful and dangerous, despite attempts by the Prostitutes Collective to paint it as otherwise. And more vulnerable people are becoming victims because of the flawed decriminalisation of prostitution. Despite the sales pitch, prostitution work is high risk and harmful based on official statistics and the testimonies of women who have managed to exit the industry. And anyone who labels it ethical ignores reality. Decriminalisation has failed to achieve its stated objectives of improving the safety, health and welfare or the conditions of the workers. What it has achieved is greatly improving the conditions for pimps and brothel owners. And we believe councils need to push back. Prostitution is harmful to workers and communities, and the association of prostitution with gang and criminal behaviour, alcohol and drug abuse, sexual abuse and violence means that we are sentencing more and more vulnerable people to an unacceptable situation. How can we be serious about reducing sexual violence against women when the state legitimises the sexual abuse and exploitation of vulnerable people? There is a healthy stigma against prostitution, and for good reason. Now, there was supposed to be a review of the law in 2018, but it was never done, and there is no intention for it to be done according to the Ministry of Justice. We commissioned some researchers to review the law, and the report highlights several significant concerns. Firstly, health and safety violations and the reality of violence. Continuing health and safety violations include coercion into unwanted sex acts, high levels of violence, physical injury, unsafe sex, and exploitative practices such as long working hours. Violence is a risk every prostitute takes on a daily basis. Assault, rape, and strangulation are not uncommon. What other business or sector of society in New Zealand would tolerate this? And yet the sex industry is sold as a success story. Where is the occupational safety and health? No other work employment sector has a risk factor where rape is considered an inherent part of the work. And why would we want a family member to be in a type of work where there is a 35% chance of being sexually molested, for example, forced to accept sex from a man they don't want to? Fueled by increasingly violent pornography and a drinking culture, punters frequently enjoy hurting women. Overseas studies show that some men think raping a prostitute is not even possible. As a result, studies continue to document depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, dissociative disorders, and bipolar disorder in women involved in prostitution. Yet New Zealand's official health and safety manual for prostitution normalises violence and coercion by advising prostitutes to identify potentially dangerous situations and to devise strategies to protect themselves. The Prostitutes Collective stated openly in 2016 that it was impossible to wipe out violence in the industry. Low rates of reporting and prosecuting violations has also happened. Fewer than 20% of those who had been physically assaulted reported it to the police. In fact, since 2003, there had been only 2 prosecutions for coercion at the time we did the report, committed usually by the pimp, despite repeated reports that it happens frequently. The black market is still around. The industry realities of gang involvement, child exploitation, and internal trafficking are largely denied or ignored by the Prostitutes Collective. The Ministry for Children confirmed that no funding had been made available to tackle underage prostitution. There's a lack of support for exiting the industry. No resources have been provided to support women who wish to exit the industry. When the law reform was being debated, it was promoted as helping to prevent entry and facilitate exiting. However, the Prostitutes Collective doesn't support that approach. Brothel inspections were mandated, but they're not happening. In the last decade, only 11 brothel inspections were made across the whole of New Zealand in a 10-year period. And there's been a failure to implement recommended changes. They did a review of the law reform in 2008, 5 years after it was passed, made 28 recommendations. Only 11 have been followed through in any way, and 17 were just ignored. So despite dangerous conditions continuing, New Zealand's prostitution law reform has been widely praised, particularly overseas, as beneficial for the women involved. The main reason for this? Well, the conversation is dominated by the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, which is just a lobby group who, unfortunately, the government and councils rely on overwhelmingly for information regarding any issue related to prostitution. The Prostitutes Collective doesn't provide support for those wishing to exit, has no official contact with the black market, and plays down the industry-wide realities of violence and exploitation, denies the existence of underage abuse and internal trafficking, rejects the voices of women who have exited the industry, and amplifies the voices of pimps. The Prostitutes Collective has always advocated for normalising prostitution as ordinary work. How many of you dream of your daughter becoming a prostitute? Please don't make it easier. Our recommendation is that the council do not liberalise the existing bylaws in any way, especially keep it out of sight of families and children. In fact, we would encourage the council to remove brothels out of the CBD. And finally, I would ask that you have a forum that allows for former prostitutes to speak freely. They will tell you that prostitution has wrecked their lives. Many suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, that their troubled upbringings attracted them to prostitution. And the only solution is to prosecute buyers in order to help prostitutes out of the industry.